There's a phrase I've heard thousands of times in my life, and every time I hear it, I know exactly what it means. It sounds so innocent, so reasonable, so final. Someone looks at an opportunity, a dream, a possibility, and they say, "I can't afford it." Those four words may seem harmless, but they are among the most expensive words you will ever speak. Because what they really mean is, I've stopped thinking. I've surrendered before I even began. Most people don't realize that the words they use every day are building the walls of their own financial prison. You see, your language is not just a reflection of your reality, it's the architect of it. Every time you say, "I can't afford it," you give your mind an order. Stop looking for answers. You turn off the most powerful computer in the world, your brain, and you lock it behind a door labeled impossible. And here's the tragedy. Most people live their entire lives behind that door. I learned early that wealth doesn't begin in your bank account. It begins in your mind. And the poor man's mind is often full of reasons. Reasons why something won't work, why something is too risky, too far away, too hard to understand. He collects those reasons the way a rich man collects assets. But reasons don't pay bills. Reasons don't create opportunities. Reasons only make you comfortable with less than you're capable of. When someone says, "I can't afford it," what they really mean is, "I've chosen not to figure out how I could." They've placed a period where there should be a question mark. Those words cut off possibility. They end the story before it begins. And the longer you repeat them, the more they become part of your identity. You start to believe that you're someone who simply can't. Not someone who hasn't yet, but someone who never will. That's the hidden danger of those four little words. They don't just describe your finances, they define your limits. And limits, when spoken often enough, harden into belief. The man who keeps saying he can't eventually won't even try. The woman who keeps saying she can't afford it will never see how close she might have been. So the question is not whether you can afford something today. The real question is, what price are you paying for saying you can't? Because the cost of that phrase is far higher than the price of anything you could buy. It costs you imagination. It costs you ambition. It costs you the habit of thinking like a creator and replaces it with the habit of waiting like a spectator. It's a small phrase, yes, but it builds an entire life. A life of waiting for a raise instead of building a skill. A life of envying others instead of learning from them. A life of shrinking dreams to fit your wallet instead of expanding your income to fit your dreams. And all of that begins with four simple words. I can't afford it. That's why the first step toward wealth, the first real step, is not financial, it's linguistic. You have to catch yourself in the act of small thinking. You have to notice the moment when you let those words escape, because each time you do, you're quietly voting for your own limitations. And if you're not careful, those votes add up to a lifetime of scarcity. We don't need to curse the economy, or blame our background, or envy the rich. We need to pay attention to the sentences we allow to live in our minds, because they become the scripts of our future. Change the words, and you change the story. Stop saying you can't, and you might finally give yourself a chance to see what you can. Now let's pause and ask, why do people say it? Why does "I can't afford it" sound so reasonable, even responsible? Because at first glance, it is a statement of fact. The numbers don't add up, the paycheck is small, the price tag is high. And so, it feels honest. But honesty is not the same as wisdom. Honesty describes where you are. Wisdom describes where you could go. And the problem with "I can't afford it" is that it confuses the two. It treats your current situation as your permanent reality. Most people say it without malice, without fear, without even realizing its power. They think they're being practical. They think they're protecting themselves from disappointment. I can't afford it becomes a shield they hold up to the world, but what they don't see is that the shield blocks opportunity, not danger. It keeps them safe from the discomfort of possibility, because possibility always asks for effort, risk, or change, and that's uncomfortable. So instead, people wrap themselves in the comfort of finality. I can't afford it. No need to think, no need to stretch, no need to grow. You see, the mind loves certainty, even when it costs progress. When you say, I can't afford it, your mind relaxes because the case is closed, no further investigation needed. But if you said, how could I afford it, the mind would have to wake up. It would have to start searching, calculating, creating, imagining. And that takes energy. For many, that's too much to ask, so they choose the comfort of defeat over the challenge of discovery. It's interesting how easily people accept limitation when it's wrapped in logic. They call it being realistic. But realism, in the mouth of a dreamer who's given up, is just pessimism with good manners. Saying I can't afford it is a way to sound responsible while secretly giving up responsibility. Because responsibility isn't about stating what is, it's about shaping what could be. Let me tell you, I've met people who had every excuse, every reason, every logical justification for staying small. And they were proud of those reasons, as if they were trophies. But every reason was just another brick in the wall separating them from their own potential. I can't afford it. It's not the right time. Maybe someday. These are not facts. They're lullabies, words that sing you to sleep when life is asking you to wake up. When I was young, I used to believe people failed because they lacked opportunity. Later I discovered that wasn't true. Opportunity is everywhere. The real scarcity is willingness. Willingness to look foolish, to try, to question the first answer your mind gives you. I can't afford it is that first answer, and the moment you accept it, you stop asking better ones. The illusion of that phrase lies in its logic. It feels factual, but it's actually fatal. It tricks you into thinking you're being smart when you're really being safe. And safety, when overused, becomes the enemy of growth. Because all progress, financial, personal, or spiritual, requires movement beyond what's comfortable. So the next time your mind says, I can't afford it, don't just listen. Watch what happens inside you. Feel how your energy drops, how your imagination fades, how your shoulders relax into defeat. That's the real cost of those words. They drain your power long before money even enters the picture. And the truth is, the phrase isn't a reflection of your bank account. It's a reflection of your beliefs. You're not describing your finances. You're describing your boundaries. And boundaries, when left unquestioned, become cages. That's why the illusion is so dangerous. It looks like common sense, but it's actually self-sabotage disguised as practicality. The moment those words leave your mouth, I can't afford it, a quiet process begins inside you. It's not dramatic. You won't feel it like a slap or a shock. It's subtle, almost invisible. But in that instant, something important shuts down. The gears of creativity stop turning. The mind, that miraculous machine designed to solve, to stretch, to build, suddenly goes idle. You've just given it a command to stop working. You've said, in essence, no need to search for a way. I've already decided there isn't one. See, your mind is obedient. It listens carefully to the instructions you give it, whether you realize you're giving them or not. Tell it, I can't, and it won't argue with you. It will simply comply. It will conserve energy, stop thinking, and move on to something easier. That's how people slowly train themselves into helplessness. They issue commands of limitation over and over again, until their brain no longer looks for doors, only for walls. The real danger is not in the moment you say it once, but in what happens when you say it 100 times, 1,000 times. Over time, it becomes your default setting. I can't afford it. I'm not qualified. That's just how it is. Each phrase is a tiny vote for stagnation. Each one turns down the volume of your ambition. And after a while, you stop realizing how often you're sabotaging yourself. Because it feels normal. You call it realism. You call it being mature. But what it really is mental laziness masquerading as prudence. Now imagine what happens inside the brain of a child who grows up hearing that phrase again and again. We can't afford it. It sounds like truth, like a law of nature. And without meaning to, that child grows into an adult who still believes in that law. It doesn't matter if their circumstances change. Their mind is still conditioned to stop searching. The words have become part of their operating system. They don't see possibilities, not because they're blind, but because they've learned not to look. The human brain is an incredible problem solver, but it needs a problem to solve. When you say, "I can't afford it," you remove the problem. You take away the challenge. You shut off the question that could have sparked a breakthrough. The brain loves a puzzle. It loves to figure things out. But if you tell it the puzzle is unsolvable, it won't waste a second trying. And that's why so many bright, talented people live far below their potential. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they've trained that intelligence to rest instead of reach. Think about the energy shift that happens in the body when someone says, "I can't." The shoulders drop, the eyes lower, the breathing shallows. That's not just emotion, that's biology responding to belief. The mind sends a message to the body, "Stand down, there's nothing to pursue," and the body obeys. But when someone says, "How can I afford it?" everything changes. The chest opens, the eyes focus, the pulse quickens. The body reawakens because the mind has given it purpose. That's the difference between defeat and discovery. It's not circumstance, it's command. I've seen it in business, in families, in personal lives. People stop fighting for what they want, not when they lose resources, but when they lose curiosity. And "I can't afford it" kills curiosity faster than any setback ever could. It's a mental off switch. And if you flip it often enough, even success will walk right past you, because opportunity doesn't stop to argue with disbelief. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I can't afford it," understand what's really happening. You're not describing a shortage of money, you're describing a shortage of imagination. You're turning off the engine that was designed to drive you towards solutions. And until you change that command, no amount of income will fix it. Because wealth doesn't come to those who stop thinking. It comes to those who never stop asking, "How could I make this possible?" Now let's look at how the wealthy think, not just in theory, but in the small, invisible habits of thought that shape every decision. When an average person looks at something desirable, a course, a trip, an investment, an idea, and says, "I can't afford it," the conversation ends. But when a wealthy person looks at the very same thing, their mind responds differently. They ask, "How could I afford it?" That small change, one word replaced with a question, creates an entirely different universe of possibilities. The wealthy don't see money as something that limits them. They see it as something to be managed, multiplied, and mobilized. When they want something, they don't simply measure their wallet, they measure their creativity. They start to ask, "What would I need to learn? Who would I need to talk to? What could I sell, trade, or create to make this happen?" That's the kind of thinking that activates every resource you already have but never noticed. You see, wealth isn't about how much you possess, it's about how you think about what you possess. Poor thinking says, "I can't." Wealth thinking says, "Let me find a way." The difference may sound subtle, but it's the reason two people can look at the same opportunity and walk away with completely different futures. The poor mind stops at the price, the rich mind looks past it to the value. The poor mind counts what's missing, the rich mind counts what's possible. It's not about arrogance or entitlement. In fact, the wealthiest people I've known are often the most curious and humble thinkers. They never assume something is out of reach. They assume there must be a way to reach it, and their job is to discover how. That attitude alone is a magnet for opportunity. Because opportunity doesn't knock for the one who's closed the door. It knocks for the one who's standing ready to answer with, "I'm working on it." When a wealthy thinker sees an expensive course, they don't think, "Too costly." They think, "If this knowledge could increase my income or impact, how quickly could it pay for itself?" When they see an investment, they don't think that's risky. They think, what do I need to understand to manage that risk wisely? When they want something better for their family, they don't sigh, maybe someday. They say, let's make a plan. Every one of these thoughts begins with curiosity, not resignation. That's why the question, how can I afford it, is not really about money. It's about identity. It's the question of someone who sees themselves as a creator, not a consumer. It assumes that you are capable of building, producing, and solving. And once you see yourself that way, your entire relationship with money changes. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being a student of them. You learn how to turn time, skills, and imagination into value, and value into income. People often assume that wealthy individuals just had better luck or better starting points. But I can tell you, many of them started broke, even in debt. What set them apart wasn't inheritance, it was inquiry. They refused to accept "I can't" as the end of the discussion. They made every no an invitation to think harder. They treated money like a puzzle that could be solved with enough creativity and persistence. And here's something else to wealthy understand. The question, how can I afford it, doesn't always lead to spending more, it often leads to learning more. Sometimes it shows you that the thing you wanted isn't worth the cost. Other times it shows you how to earn more than you ever imagined. Either way, you win, because you stayed awake. You kept your mind engaged in the game of possibility. That's why "I can't afford it" and "how can I afford it" are not just different phrases, they're different destinies. One shuts the door on growth, the other opens 1,000. One teaches your mind to surrender, the other teaches it to search. And life always rewards the searcher. The person who keeps asking, keeps learning, keeps moving. The person who treats every limitation not as a wall, but as a question mark. That's the way the wealthy think, and it's the way anyone can begin to think, starting right now. Picture two people standing in front of the very same opportunity. A new skill to learn, a small business to start, a property to invest in. A book that could change their thinking. One of them looks at the cost and says, "I can't afford it." The other looks at that same price tag and asks, "How could I afford it?" That single difference in language sets them on two completely different roads, one that ends in excuses and another that ends in expansion. The first person feels relieved after saying, "I can't afford it." The mind closes, the tension drops, and the challenge disappears. But that's also when growth disappears. That's when potential quietly walks out the door. The second person, the one who asks, "How could I afford it?" feels the same tension, but instead of running from it, they turn that tension into energy. They start to think, to explore, to experiment. That discomfort becomes fuel. One mind shuts down, the other wakes up. This is the invisible moment where lives diverge. One person becomes a chronic observer of success. They watch others rise and say, "Must be nice." The other becomes a student of success. They watch others rise and ask, "What can I learn?" It's not intelligence that separates them, not talent, not luck. It's simply the habit of replacing conclusions with questions. One ends every thought with a period, the other begins every idea with a question mark. Let's take a simple example. Two friends see an online course that costs $500. The first says, "That's too expensive," and scrolls on. The second says, "How could I afford that?" and starts looking. Maybe they cut one expense. Maybe they offer a small service to earn the extra money. Maybe they reach out to a mentor or partner. A few weeks later, one still has $0 and no new skill, while the other has both the course and the mindset that will make it pay for itself 100 times over. Or think of the person who sees a business opportunity and says, "I can't risk that kind of money." What they mean is, "I won't take responsibility for learning how to manage that risk wisely." Another person sees the same situation and says, "How can I make this risk smart, not reckless?" And by asking that question, they learn about markets, negotiation, partnerships. In other words, they grow, and growth, sooner or later, always attracts wealth. That's the secret few people understand. It's not the big financial choices that decide your destiny. It's the tiny mental ones. The micro decisions you make in seconds to stop or to search, to accept or to ask. Every "I can't afford it" is a micro decision for stagnation. Every "how could I afford it" is a micro decision for progress. Repeat one long enough and you get a lifetime of excuses. Repeat the other and you get a lifetime of expansion. When you study people who've built wealth from nothing, you'll see the same pattern. They faced the same doubts, the same bills, the same limits, but instead of saying "I can't," they asked, "How can I?" How can I save more? How can I sell better? How can I serve deeper? How can I make my time more valuable? And because they kept asking, they kept finding. The difference between the poor and the wealthy isn't that one has answers, it's that one keeps asking better questions. The truth is, both people are right. The one who says "I can't afford it," they won't. The one who says "How could I afford it?" they will. Life will always confirm your language, because your words are signals and your mind is listening. Tell it there's nothing to find and it stops looking. Tell it there must be a way and it won't rest until it discovers one. That's the beautiful, frightening power of choice, and it happens every time you open your mouth. So the next time you face something you think you can't afford, pause before you speak. Don't make the decision for your future self. Instead, invite your future self into the conversation. Ask the question that starts the engine. How could I afford this? Not should I, not can I, but how. Because the how is what turns limitation into leverage. It's what turns an obstacle into a plan. And if you make that your reflex, if you train your mind to begin with how instead of can't, you'll soon find that the world is far more cooperative than it ever seemed before. If you feed it conclusions, it will live inside them forever. But if you feed it questions, it will start to move, to search, to stretch. It will look for angles, for openings, for chances you didn't even know were there. That's the genius of the question, how can I afford it? It takes the same energy that once built excuses and redirects it towards solutions. Every breakthrough I've ever seen, in business, in relationships, in personal growth, started with a question. Not with knowing, but with wondering. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. People often think the wealthy are people with all the answers. In truth, they are people who have learned to ask better questions and to keep asking until the answers appear. When you ask, "How can I afford it?" your mind goes to work immediately. It begins running through possibilities. Could I learn a new skill? Could I create a new source of income? Could I adjust my spending, trade time for opportunity, find a partner, or build something of value? This is mental momentum. You move from a state of limitation to a state of activation. That's when imagination, creativity, and resourcefulness step onto the field. People often say, "I just don't have enough time or money." But the truth is, what most lack is not time or money. It's the discipline to ask empowering questions. Questions that demand growth. Questions that stretch comfort. Questions that don't let you stay small. How could I is one of those questions. It challenges your pride and your passivity. It forces you to face the difference between "I can't" and "I haven't yet." When you live in statements, life becomes narrow and predictable. But when you live in questions, life becomes wide and full of motion. Questions invite the mind to play, to explore, to take ownership. They awaken the problem-solving instincts that are dormant in most people because they've been lulled to sleep by the repetition of excuses. A good question is like turning on a light in a dark room. The space was always there, but now you can see what's inside it. If you were to record your thoughts for a single day, you'd notice something remarkable. The poor person's mind repeats the same statements, the same complaints, the same "can't" over and over. The rich person's mind asks over and over, how could I make this better? How could I learn faster? How could I turn this into an advantage? Same day, same challenges, different mindsets, and therefore different results. I often tell people the answer is never the real prize. The process of questioning is. Because that process builds capacity. It makes you smarter, tougher, more creative. It strengthens the mental muscles that separate those who wait for opportunity from those who create it. And once your mind gets a taste for questions, it will never again be satisfied with excuses. So, when you catch yourself about to say, I can't afford it, stop and turn it into a question. You don't even have to know the answer, just ask it with sincerity. The moment you do, you invite possibility back into your life. You tell your mind, wake up, go to work, find me a way. And believe me, it will. Because the mind, when properly directed, is relentless. It will search, it will calculate, it will create, and it will find, if only you dare to ask. Reprogramming the mind is one of the most valuable investments you'll ever make. You can change your job, your address, your friends, even your wardrobe. But if you don't change your language, your results will stay the same. Because your words are the blueprint your mind builds your reality from. And every time you say, I can't afford it, you're adding another brick to the wall between you and your potential. But here's the beauty of it. That wall isn't made of stone. It's made of habits. And habits can be rewritten. The first step is awareness. You have to catch yourself in the act of small thinking. Most people live their entire lives on autopilot, repeating phrases they learned as children. Money doesn't grow on trees. That's too expensive. People like us can't have that. These aren't facts, they're programs. And your brain runs them like old software. You can't install a wealthy life on a poverty program. So your job is to update the language, to catch every I can't and replace it with how can I? At first, it will feel strange. You'll notice how many times a day you default to limitation. You'll catch yourself saying, I can't afford it, not just about money, but about time, energy, courage, and even joy. But that's good. Awareness is the beginning of control. Once you can see the pattern, you can change it. You can pause and say, no, that's not the way I think anymore. Let me rephrase that. It may sound simple, but this small act of linguistic discipline reshapes the entire structure of your mind. The second step is repetition. One new phrase won't erase years of mental conditioning. You have to train it like a muscle. Each time you choose how can I over I can't, you strengthen the neural pathways that lead to creativity instead of defeat. Over time, those pathways become your default. Your mind begins to look automatically for solutions, resources, and angles. You become a problem solver by habit. That's when opportunity starts to recognize you, because opportunity always gravitates toward the mind that's awake and working. The third step is association. Surround yourself with people who ask good questions, who talk in terms of possibilities instead of problems. Language is contagious. Spend enough time with complainers and you'll catch their vocabulary. Spend time with builders and you'll start thinking in blueprints. Listen carefully to the conversations around you. Are they full of reasons or full of results? Every word you absorb shapes the software running in your mind. Choose your environment like you'd choose a business partner, wisely. The fourth step is practice under pressure. It's easy to ask how can I when life is calm. The real test comes when the bill arrives, when the deal falls through, when the dream looks distant. That's when the old programming wants to take over. But if you can pause, breathe, and ask, all right, how can I make this work? In those moments, you've won. You've taken control of your inner dialogue, and that's the first victory of every achiever. And finally, gratitude. This one surprises people, but it's powerful. Gratitude shifts your focus from lack to resource.
When you appreciate what you already have, your mind becomes alert to how to use it better. A grateful mind says, "Look at all I can build with what's here." A resentful mind says, "Look at all I don't have." One sees tools, the other sees obstacles. One grows, the other complains. Gratitude keeps your mental lens clear so that your questions lead to answers instead of excuses. This process, catching, replacing, repeating, surrounding, practicing, and appreciating, it's not a one-time exercise. It's a lifestyle. It's mental hygiene. You brush your teeth every day to prevent decay. You must train your mind every day to prevent decay of ambition. Because the world is full of noise that wants to convince you to settle, to stop, to say, "I can't." You have to be louder than that noise. You have to reprogram your inner dialogue until "how can I" becomes as natural as breathing. Do this long enough, and you'll notice something extraordinary. Life starts to respond differently. Doors you didn't see before begin to appear. People, ideas, and opportunities seem to align in ways they never did. It's not magic. It's the result of a mind that's finally turned on. A mind that has been retrained to ask instead of accept, to seek instead of surrender. That's the mind of someone who's no longer waiting to afford life, but learning every day how to create it. Let me tell you a story or two, because sometimes a single example teaches more than 1,000 ideas. Years ago, I met a young man after one of my seminars. He came up to me and said, "Mr. Rohn, I wanted to attend your full leadership program, but I couldn't afford it." I smiled and asked him, "What would have happened if you had asked yourself instead, how could you afford it?" He looked at me puzzled. I told him, "If you really wanted to be there, you could have found a way. You could have offered to volunteer, to help with registration, to set up chairs, to do something that gets you in the room. The value is not in the seat, it's in the exposure." His eyes widened, and he said quietly, "I never thought of it that way." 6 months later, I saw him again. This time, he was helping organize the same event. He'd volunteered, just like we talked about. He hadn't paid a cent, but he gained something priceless: proximity to people who thought bigger, dreamed bigger, and acted bigger. That one question, "How can I afford it?" changed his direction. Within 2 years, he'd built a small business of his own, not because he got lucky, but because he retrained his mind to look for paths instead of barriers. Here's another story. A woman once told me she'd always wanted to start her own catering business, but couldn't afford the equipment. For years, she repeated that phrase like a personal motto: "I can't afford it." One day, after hearing a similar lesson, she changed her question. Instead of saying, "I can't," she asked, "How can I start with what I already have?" Within days, she realized she owned a kitchen, basic tools, and enough passion to make something happen.
What changed wasn't her income, it was her inquiry. She stopped focusing on what she didn't have and started using what she did. She stopped waiting for conditions to be perfect and began moving with imperfection. The moment she changed her question, her world expanded. That's the unseen miracle of the right question. It doesn't give you the answer immediately, but it puts you on the road where the answers live. I once heard someone say, "The universe hides its treasures not behind walls, but behind questions." I found that to be true. Every success story I've ever witnessed began with someone asking something different from what everyone else was asking. When others said, "Why me?" they asked, "Why not me?" When others said, "I can't afford it," they asked, "What would I need to do to make this possible?" It's not that life gave them more opportunities, it's that their curiosity uncovered the ones that were already there. People who change their lives rarely do it with money first. They do it with creativity. Creativity always comes before capital. The person who says, "I can't afford it," waits for the world to deliver resources before they act. The one who says, "How can I afford it?" uses imagination as their first investment. And imagination, when exercised daily, compounds faster than interest in any bank. I remember hearing a story about a young college student who dreamed of studying abroad but couldn't afford it. Every friend she had told her to be realistic. But instead of surrendering, she started asking, "How can I make this happen?" She researched scholarships, contacted companies for sponsorships, organized small fundraisers, and offered tutoring to save extra money. A year later, she was on a plane, not because someone handed her a ticket, but because she built it with effort, persistence, and imagination. These examples are not miracles, they're patterns. The pattern of possibility always begins the same way: a shift from statements to questions, from complaint to curiosity. People who achieve remarkable things don't start with better circumstances. They start with better conversations with themselves. They ask questions that pull them forward, not phrases that hold them back. So whenever you catch yourself thinking, "I can't afford it," think of these stories. Real people, ordinary beginnings, extraordinary outcomes. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for the perfect time. They simply refused to let their language decide their limits. Because once you trade excuses for questions, you stop being a spectator and start becoming a creator. And that's when life starts opening its hidden doors. There's a price we pay every time we choose an excuse over effort, and most people never stop to count it. You see, the phrase, "I can't afford it," doesn't just save you from spending money. It costs you something far greater. It costs you your potential, your momentum, your belief in what's possible. It's a quiet, invisible tax on your future. Every time you say it, you pay a little piece of your confidence, and after a few years, you don't even notice it's gone. The tragedy of that phrase is not in the missed purchase, it's in the missed growth. Because the moment you say, "I can't afford it," you stop growing. You teach yourself to stay still. You train your brain to accept a smaller version of yourself. And what begins as a practical statement soon becomes an identity. You no longer say, "I can't afford that thing." You start believing, "I'm just not the kind of person who can." And that's a much heavier cost than any price tag. I've seen people spend decades in that mindset. They think they're saving money, but they're actually losing opportunity. The person who says, "I can't afford to invest," misses the compounding power of time. The one who says, "I can't afford to learn," misses the compounding power of knowledge. And the one who says, "I can't afford to rest," misses the compounding power of renewal. It's not about the money. It's about what you give up in your thinking when you say those words. The cost of "I can't" is cumulative. Each time you speak it, your confidence erodes just a little more. Your tolerance for risk drops. Your dreams start to shrink to fit your comfort zone. Before long, you've traded the excitement of possibility for the safety of limitation. You tell yourself you're being responsible, but what you're really being is resigned. You've accepted scarcity as your teacher and fear as your financial advisor. Now here's the truth. Everything you say no to has a price. When you say, "I can't afford it," you don't just save money. You spend a piece of imagination. You sacrifice the practice of solving problems. You delay the muscle of resourcefulness. And when those muscles go unused for too long, they atrophy. Then, even when opportunity does knock, you're too weak to lift it. That's why so many people miss their moment. They've trained for safety, not for strength. There's another hidden cost. "I can't afford it" damages trust, not in others, but in yourself. Because deep down, every time you say it, a small voice inside you knows it isn't the whole truth. You could find a way if you were willing. You could learn, sell, save, or create something, but you choose not to. And over time, that choice chips away at self-respect. You start doubting your own power. You begin to believe that things happen to you, not through you. That belief is poverty of the worst kind. People think poverty is about a lack of money. No. Poverty begins with a lack of belief. It's the moment you stop trusting your own ability to find a way. And the phrase, "I can't afford it," is the moment that disbelief becomes vocabulary. Every repetition reinforces the wall between where you are and where you could be. Every excuse adds another lock to the door of potential. But when you start to replace it with, "How can I afford it?" you begin to reverse the damage. You start rebuilding the muscle of belief. You reawaken the part of your mind that remembers how capable you really are. You remind yourself that wealth isn't a destination, it's a skill set. A skill you practice every time you choose curiosity over complaint. So take inventory. Count the cost of your "I can'ts." Add up the dreams delayed, the chances ignored, the ideas untested. That's the real debt most people carry, not financial, but mental. A debt of unrealized potential. The good news, you can start paying it off today with a single question. One that opens the mind instead of closing it. One that invites action instead of apology. One that says, "Enough with reasons, it's time to find a way." Wealth has very little to do with money and everything to do with the way you think about it. Money simply obeys thought. It flows toward clarity, confidence, creativity, and it escapes confusion, fear, and doubt. That's why before people ever build financial wealth, they build mental wealth. They learn to see the world as a network of opportunities, not a list of prices. And that's what the phrase, "I can't afford it," destroys. It blinds you to the wealth that's already within your reach. When you study wealthy people, truly wealthy, not just those with a high income, you'll notice something remarkable. Their lives are full of movement. They're always learning, adjusting, investing, experimenting. They think in terms of growth, not in terms of limits. They ask, "How can I make this work?" instead of, "Why can't I?" And because their minds are in motion, money stays in motion too. That's the essence of wealth, circulation. Most people live in financial stagnation because their thinking is stagnant. They wait for money to come before they start moving. The wealthy start moving, and that's why money comes. They invest not because they're rich. They become rich because they invest, first in knowledge, then in opportunity, then in people. And every investment begins with a mindset that says, "There must be a way." A wealthy mind doesn't deny reality, it reinterprets it. If cash is low, they ask, "What asset can I leverage? What skill can I improve? Who can I serve better?" They don't take a lack of funds as a full stop. They take it as a challenge to innovate. That's why the wealthy grow richer even in recessions. Because while others freeze, they adapt. While others repeat, "I can't afford it," they whisper, "How can I turn this into an advantage?" To think like the wealthy, you must learn to detach from the surface of money and look at its source. Value. Value is what money chases. The more value you create, the more money you attract. But to create value, you have to think freely. You can't innovate from a mindset of scarcity. "I can't afford it" cuts the oxygen supply to creativity. "How can I afford it" floods it with air. One suffocates your resourcefulness, the other fuels it. The wealthy also understand that money is not the master. It's a mirror. It reflects your decisions, your habits, your patience, and your beliefs. If you believe you are limited, your results will prove you're right. If you believe you can find a way, your results will eventually confirm that too. Money is neutral. It simply amplifies who you are. That's why people who think poorly. And here's the deeper truth. Wealth is not a number. It's a capacity. A capacity to create, to endure, to adapt. It's the ability to think beyond circumstances. That's why some people earn millions and still feel poor, because their mind never learned abundance. They still think in terms of what they can't do, can't have, can't risk. They've changed their income, but not their identity. You build true wealth the moment you stop asking, "How much does it cost?" and start asking, "What is it worth to me?" Because cost is a number, but worth is a mindset. One keeps you counting, the other keeps you growing. And as Jim Rohn used to say, if you work hard on your job, you'll make a living. But if you work hard on yourself, you'll make a fortune. That's the essence of wealthy thinking. You focus on the source, not the symptom. So, don't measure your wealth by your bank account. Measure it by your ability to generate ideas, to see potential, to solve problems. Measure it by how quickly you recover from setbacks and how gracefully you adapt to change. That's the wealth no one can take from you. Because money can vanish, markets can crash, but a mind trained to ask how instead of can't will rebuild, reinvent, and rise again. The moment you adopt that way of thinking, you stop chasing wealth. You start creating it. And soon, you'll notice the world begins to meet you differently. Opportunities seem to find you, but they were always there. It's your vision that changed. Because once you stop saying, I can't afford it, you start living like someone who understands that the greatest wealth isn't in your wallet. It's in your words and the way you choose to think. There comes a time when you have to give yourself a new language, the language of possibility, because words are the software of the mind, and outdated language creates outdated results. Every successful person I've met speaks a different dialect, the dialect of responsibility, growth, and curiosity. They don't speak in terms of lack, they speak in terms of leverage. They've trained themselves to use words that move them forward. And you can too. Let's start with the simplest swap. Instead of saying, I can't afford it, say, how can I afford it? Instead of, I don't have time, ask, how can I make time? Instead of, that's impossible, say, what would have to happen for it to be possible? These aren't just linguistic tricks, they're mental levers. Each one takes a wall and turns it into a door. The phrasing may seem minor, but it changes everything because it changes direction. A statement closes the mind, a question opens it. The language of success is not loud or complicated, it's precise. It trains your mind to look for control rather than surrender. When you say, I can't afford it, you put the power outside of yourself. You make life the decision maker. But when you say, how can I afford it, you bring that power back. You say to the universe, the solution is out there and I'm willing to look for it. That's why opportunity gravitates toward those who speak with intention. Their words signal readiness. Another powerful shift is from blame to ownership. Most people say things like, they won't hire me, the economy is bad, no one's buying. But the successful person asks, how can I make myself more valuable? What skills could I learn that this economy rewards? What do buyers actually want right now? Same world, same challenges, different conversation. One person waits for change, the other becomes it. Change your words about effort too. Replace I have to with I get to. It may sound small, but it transforms burden into privilege. I have to go to work becomes I get to go to work, and gratitude turns effort into opportunity. You begin to see your responsibilities not as weights, but as tools for growth. You realize that everything that stretches you also strengthens you. That's the kind of mindset that wealth is built on. The understanding that work is not punishment, it's preparation. And what about failure? Most people frame it as final. I failed. But the language of success turns that into I learned. When you say I failed, your mind stops. When you say I learned, it moves forward. It starts scanning for patterns, insights, adjustments. That's why people who seem lucky are often just those who have redefined losing. They've given themselves permission to collect data instead of guilt. Language also governs emotion. The words you choose are the thermostat of your emotional state. Call a challenge a problem, and you feel stress. Call it a test, and you feel engaged. Call it an opportunity, and you feel inspired. The situation hasn't changed. Only the vocabulary did. And yet that shift in language changes your behavior, your energy, and ultimately your results. Over time, these linguistic upgrades become habits. You stop reacting to life, and you start designing it. Your words become tools of architecture rather than evidence of defeat. You begin to construct sentences that build, not break. And when you hear others say, I can't afford it, you'll recognize it for what it is, not a truth, but a trance,
a verbal lullaby that keeps people asleep while life is waiting for them to wake up. So rewrite your script. Speak like the person you want to become, not the person you're trying to escape. Talk about vision, about effort, about creation. Refuse to use words that betray your potential, because your vocabulary will always reveal your destiny. The person who speaks of limits lives them. The one who speaks of possibility creates them. Choose your words as carefully as an investor chooses assets, because that's exactly what they are: linguistic assets that appreciate with use. And when you've practiced this long enough, you'll notice something miraculous. The outer world begins to echo the inner one. Your language shapes your lens shapes your actions, and your actions shape your results. That's the chain reaction of wealth. It starts not in the economy, but in the conversation you have with yourself. The richest minds are not those who know the most answers, but those who ask the best questions and speak the most empowering words. At the end of the day, it all comes down to one simple truth. Life listens to the language you speak, the words you choose, the thoughts you entertain, the questions you ask. They don't just describe your reality, they design it. Every "I can't afford it" builds a ceiling over your future, while every "how can I afford it" lifts that ceiling higher. One mindset limits your potential to your current circumstances, the other expands your circumstances to fit your potential. The choice is always yours. I've spent a lifetime watching this principle at work. I've seen people rise from nothing, not because they were handed an advantage, but because they refused to accept limitation as truth. They asked different questions, they used different words, and those words reshaped their world. They stopped saying "I can't" and started saying "how can I?" They stopped waiting for life to get easier and decided to get stronger. That shift doesn't just change your finances, it changes your future. You see, success isn't an event, it's a dialogue. It's the ongoing conversation between you and your possibilities. Every time you ask a better question, you invite a better answer. Every time you choose faith over fear in your language, you plant a seed for something greater. It's not about pretending challenges don't exist. It's about refusing to give them the final word. Wealthy thinking doesn't ignore obstacles, it interrogates them until they give up their wisdom. So start today. Catch yourself when you say "I can't." Pause, breathe, and ask, "How can I?" Ask it when you look at your goals. Ask it when you look at your bills. Ask it when you look at your dreams. Make that question your daily discipline, your mental workout, your new reflex. Because the moment your language changes, your direction changes. And eventually, your life does too. Don't underestimate the power of small shifts. A single phrase can redirect the course of your life. Every time you replace a statement of defeat with a question of discovery, you build new mental muscle. Over time, those muscles turn into momentum, and momentum turns into mastery. That's how ordinary people create extraordinary results. One question, one thought, one word at a time.
If there's one lesson I hope you take with you, it's this: never let your mouth talk you out of your own future. Don't speak in terms of scarcity when abundance is waiting for you to notice it. Don't say you can't when what you really mean is you haven't figured out how yet. Speak like someone who's building, not begging, because every word is a seed, and your life will always grow in the direction of the words you plant. Remember, you're the author of your own financial story. You can write a tale of limitation or one of expansion. You can spend your days explaining why it can't be done, or you can spend them discovering how it can. Ask better questions, speak better words, think bigger thoughts. And before long, you'll realize that wealth was never something you chased. It was something you cultivated, one idea at a time. And if this message resonated with you, if it woke something up inside you, then let's keep this journey going. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next lesson. Hit the like button if these words spoke to you.
Turn on the notification bell so you're the first to hear new insights on building wealth, wisdom, and discipline. And share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what "I can't afford it" moment you're ready to replace with "How can I afford it?" Because this conversation isn't just about money, it's about mastery. Let's grow together. Let's build the mindset that builds everything else. Your next chapter begins with one question. Go ahead, ask it.